A few years ago, I went through a phase where I got really into researching stories of quitting. And it wasn't a heavy phase at all. I actually love those phrases like, when you hear that voice inside you saying, give up, listen to it, because quitting feels so good. And sometimes it really does. Because not everything has to be carried through to the end. And this episode is about that, about quitting. But hold on, this conversation will make sense.
You're listening to Homo Academicus, and today, in the final episode of our season, we're going to talk about throwing it all away. Just kidding, because honestly, you'd have to pick it all up afterwards. If you haven't already, follow us on your favorite podcast platform and send this episode to the friend who is current at that moment. Oh, don't push me cause I'm too close to the edge.
Have you ever seen those personality tests based on are you the kind of person who finishes a book or the type who abandons it? So if you say you finished the book, even if it's terrible, it means you're dedicated, super loyal. But if you abandon the book, it means you're unreliable, struggle with commitment, and so on. Ever seen that? Well, I think that's a bunch of nonsense. Sure, some people read the book to the end out of a sense of commitment, overcoming the challenge of tackling a long book or something like that. But why, right? I always imagine the person taking a sip of milk, realizing it tastes bad, and just keeping on drinking till the end. Marcel Duchamp, for instance. Do you remember him? The guy who put a urinal in an art exhibition? One of the most important figures in the 20th century art. Well, he gave up. Back in 1918, he was already showing signs of this, saying he didn't have the enthusiasm of a professional painter, complaining about the art being produced by others, and so on. He said he was giving up art in favor of chess, which he considered to be purer. He even competed internationally for several years. Then, there's Sturtevant, an American artist considered one of the mothers of appropriation art, who also stopped creating art when, in the 1960s, another artist defamed her. In Brazil, we have Raduan Nassar, who quit both a literature and a law degree. He spent a few months in the United States and gave up being an immigrant there. He went to Germany to take a German course but quit and returned. He even abandoned the local newspaper he had taken over. We know him for writing some great short stories followed by novels like Ancient Tillage and A Cup of Rage. In 2016, he won the Camões Prize for Literature in Portuguese. But then, he gave up literature and moved to the countryside to live a quieter life. Is giving up a failure? Listen to what happened to Deborah, our Homo Academicus host in Portuguese.
Well, I'm nowhere near those giants Alejandra mentioned, but speaking from my own experience, I quit a production engineering course I was in for almost a year, and later a math course I did for almost 2 years. And for a long time I felt really bad about it. Okay, I won't lie. What if my therapist ends up listening to this? I still feel very bad about it sometimes. When I'm feeling down, I see what I went through as a sign of weakness, like a curse that fell upon me. And since I gave up once, I will just give up forever. That's it. From now on, it's going to be like this. I will never finish anything again. Never, never, never again. And I feel as if I am behind in life.
I don't know if you, the one listening to me, have ever gone through this or had that deep desire to quit. Probably yes, right? It's the kind of thing that affects everyone at some point in life. But I wanted to focus here on those who feel this way about university and how we could try to break down this feeling. First, we could think, is quitting a virtue or a vice?
In certain situations, quitting can actually be an intellectual virtue. In fact, Dr. Heather Battley, a professor of epistemology and ethics in the philosophy department at the University of Connecticut, has dedicated an entire study to how quitting, procrastinating, and relaxing can be intellectual virtues when placed in the right context. An example is when you're in an environment that is not friendly to intellectual development. A place where people are systematically prevented from pursuing their intellectual goals, the goals that they desire to pursue. As Dr. Bartali says, we can remind ourselves of the ways in which women have been, in some places, continue to be, systematically excluded from formal education and directed to more trivial subjects. When women are prevented from studying subjects like mathematics, literature, history, and science, and are directed to more trivial matters, for example, studying traditional etiquette. In this environment, quitting is more akin to an intellectual virtue than a vice. The truth is that you are being virtuous when you care about your intellectual goals and you realize that there are real limitations, maybe in this vicious environment that I just described, or maybe it's a tough time in life, a tough period, and perhaps the best option for now is to abandon certain endeavors. You are acting in favor of an epistemic good because you want to move forward, but in a different way, and perhaps in a different place.
What Ana Becerra just mentioned helps us break down our emotions and intentions around the question, do I really want to be here? Is there something that needs to change? Because first, we need to consider one thing. Those who quit are the ones who can. We can't just quit a bad job because we woke up feeling like it. Sometimes, and I mean a lot, we have to stay there because we need to. At the end of the month, bills won't give up on us. Even though it's not easy, research in our region seems to always take a backseat to public policies, and we end up with little structural support to persist. The university, especially graduate school, can serve as a social filter, in the sense that only those who have family support can keep going, because not every country offers free public education. In Colombia, for example, you still have to pay. In Chile, too. Even though there are many scholarships that cover either the monthly fee or provide a wage to live, or even both, since some people manage to get both, not everyone gets them. In fact, students and professors there have been complaining that these scholarships are shrinking.
When I got into the master's program, I moved to another city in Brazil without knowing if I would get a scholarship. The program doesn't inform you in advance if you will receive one or not. And no, it's not just my program. I know of people from another program whose coordinator encouraged them to move to another city to pursue it, promising they would get a scholarship, and it's been almost a year and still haven't got it. So you need some financial support from your family or friends, which was my case, to take such a leap into the unknown and enroll. I arrived in the city with less than $35, and my friends were the ones who really helped me at that time. Then I started working at a school grading essays, and about a month after classes started, I found out I would get the scholarship, and I had to wait another month for the money. I also started doing some freelance work because I needed to pay back what my friends had lent me for the moving process and to furnish the empty apartment. Later, I had to keep freelancing because what I was getting covered was only the basic needs, but my scholarship wasn't enough for other expenses like medical bills or a trip to visit my parents. I felt like that cliché, a humanities person who does a bunch of things that don't make money. But I couldn't give any of that up because it was what was sustaining my education, especially since I had finally understood my calling and was sure I wanted to keep studying literature to become a professor.
You just listened to Deborah. So it's common in these contexts of greater economic fragility for someone to have to give up their undergraduate or graduate studies to work. Sometimes they don't even make it to graduate school, right? Because they have to focus on another job that can sustain themselves and their family. But what I shared about my story is an example of how the community can help us not to give up. Well, for some people, what keeps them going despite the difficulties is the amazement with what they've been researching, understanding the importance of it and the dream of changing the world with their discoveries and proposals. In other cases, it's precisely the lack of infrastructure that keeps us there. This is the opportunity I have to climb the social ladder. I have to grab it with both hands. At times, it's only the support of family who is doing everything they can to keep us going. Even if they don't fully understand what we're doing, that gives us the strength to pursue the dream of creating a better structure to offer to our families.
In one of the courses I took before pursuing my degree in literature, I had to deal with some professors who didn't help at all. And there was one situation where, after a test, the professor called each of us up front to pick up our test, which he had taken the trouble to arrange from lowest to highest grade. And I was one of the first to be called. When I stood up, he loudly announced my grade and asked if I wasn't ashamed. And he asked me in front of everyone if studying for his subject wasn't a priority for me. And, well, it wasn't that it wasn't my priority. It was just really difficult. I spent all my time there feeling like I shouldn't be there, like I didn't deserve to be there. I had close friends whom I loved, questioning why I wasn't that course, since it wasn't even a course for women. And no, it isn't a story from the beginning of the last century. And that day was kind of the last straw. I felt humiliated. I know that I really fulfilled myself in literature, but I wonder if it wouldn't have been different if I had encountered other types of professors in that course and different culture in that university. One that didn't treat people as inferior, those they just didn't belong there, or those in one course versus another, things like that.
There's a lot that we need to emotionally mature to deal with, but I think sometimes it crosses a line, and the way people treat each other can indeed kill vocations. Of course, we're always here saying the university is this or that, but the truth is that saying the university is this or that is really complicated. Universities are not the same. Sure, there's a lot in common, but each university course and program, they are unique with their own cultures. And we're not the same either, so our experiences aren't the same. The experience Deborah shared was awful for her, but what she shared with me is that she knows that university isn't like that for many others for various reasons. Thinking about that helps me have more empathy when someone comes to complain to me. It's not necessarily true that if a certain professor is kind to me, they'll be that way with everyone. I imagine it's the same for the professors. Each student is different to each professor. And a student is also one thing in the classroom and another as a mentee. Just because I find it easy to keep up with the readings or lab experiments doesn't mean that's the same for everyone. Keeping that in mind helps me listen better to what others are sharing about their experiences and take them more seriously. Murilo Araujo from the Muro Pequeño YouTube channel also had a very difficult experience at university, and you'll hear his story in the voice of Thomas Friseiro.
Olha, acho que é importante começar dizendo que não fui eu que desisti da universidade, foi a universidade que desistiu de mim.
Look, I think it's important to start by saying that it wasn't me who gave up on university. It was the university that gave up on me first.
Eu fui desligado do meu programa.
I was removed from a graduate program. Actually, I was expelled. People are afraid of that word, so they say, oh, I was dismissed, I was withdrawn. Terms that sound nicer, but that's what really happened.
Mas o que aconteceu foi que ao fim desses quase 5 anos...
But what happened was that after 5 years, it was the university that was responsible for this breakup. The dismissal came from the university side. But I still say, when I arrived at my first therapy session, after receiving the news of my dismissal, that was the moment I was able to say out loud and admit that my feeling about it was one of relief. I had told everyone that I was very sad, very disappointed, that it was all over because this was a project I wanted so much, something I had wished for and invested almost 5 years of my life into. Some people asked me, but if you file for an injunction, if you take legal action, don't you think you could extend those 3 years? And honestly, I think I could have. But I keep saying no, that even my advisor had told me there was nothing else to be done, that there was no way forward, that this was it. But the truth is that I didn't want to tell anyone. I didn't have the courage to say it to anyone, not even to myself, that what I really wanted at that moment was for it all to be over. I only had the courage to admit it when I got to the therapy session and said, I think what I'm feeling is relief. It's over. I don't have to deliver anything anymore. And that was it. Now, it still took some time before I actually gave up on university, before I let go of academic life for good. And these are the subtle nuances of the violence present in this experience. Things that many people don't realize, and sometimes even we don't realize ourselves. I needed to look at it from a great distance. After some time, already out of the university, looking from the outside, after having gone through a lot of therapy. I say that while I was still in the graduate program, I was aware that I was experiencing violence there, but I needed that distance to truly understand the extent of it. I was still normalizing a lot of things, and also to understand the number of lasting effects, right? Because these are things that only with time, only after a long time, I finally stopped to go to the doctor, get tests done, and see how things were, see the state of my gastritis, see the condition of my spine, the state of everything in my body, really. I'm someone who normally doesn't have a history of developing mental health conditions. I was never diagnosed with depression, anxiety, or anything like that. But during my PhD, I went through periods of deep depression, a deeply depressive phase where I spent entire days lying in the bed, completely drained, unable to do anything. Always with the intention of eventually getting up and sitting down to write. But it was almost like a physical block, a kind of paralysis. My psychologist used it to say that I had a paralyzing anguish, and that's exactly how it felt. Being stuck in the bed all the time, with my computer right there, always thinking, oh, I will sit down and write soon. No, in just a little while. It was an endless cycle of procrastination, but in a state of complete paralysis. I have chronic pain in my body because of the process, because of the university, the academic life. The gift the university left me was 2 degrees and 4 herniated discs. So it's really hard to look back at this history, at this journey, because there's so much violence involved, often operating those subtle places that we almost don't notice, don't realize. It took some time after this process. Maturing the detachment, maturing what I lived within the university. It was only after this process that I understood that I didn't want to return, that I didn't want to go back, that I no longer wanted the academic life, the academic trajectory. Because beyond understanding all the processes of violence I went through, the entire trajectory of the rotten institutional reality I faced in that place, I also confronted the fact that the type of knowledge I wanted to produce, the type of contribution I wanted to make with my work, wasn't necessarily an academic contribution, and the kind of knowledge I wanted to create, project, spread, produce, and reflect on didn't fit within the academic spaces. At least, not the ones I had passed through. And I had to make a move to reinvent myself, to seek other spaces, other possibilities, even to stay professionally active. And these other spaces, for me, presented more interesting and more powerful paths than the path the university presented to me. Ways to articulate my curiosities, my research interests, my study interests, which to me were more powerful, more interesting than within the university context, specifically.
É por isso que eu gosto do meu fracasso, porque foi...
This is why I embrace my failure. This is why I love my failure. Because it was the university giving up on me that introduced me to a bunch of other things I wouldn't have gone looking for if I hadn't been dismissed from the university. And then I always say the number of things I would have kept submitting myself to, the things I would have kept going through if I had stayed in the university, if I had defended my thesis, if I had become a professor, and so on. I'm grateful for that dismissal because it forced me to engage with other things that allowed me to find other paths and to let go of academy as a decision, as a potential career I had long aspired to. So that's kind of my complex trajectory, harsh in certain ways, but that reached this point where I can say, no, the university is not for me. And that's okay. It's a space I still find powerful for others who are willing to make that struggle. But there are paths outside of the university to what I went there to pursue. What I thought was the only legitimate and authentic place to produce these things, to fulfill myself professionally. This realization was quite significant to me, despite having come from such a violent process. I remember a title that Dom Luciano Mendes de Almeida, who was the bishop of the Archdiocese of Mariana, where I lived for a while when I studied in Viçosa, had received from our theology college. When I arrived there, he had just passed away, and the new bishop had been there for about a month, maybe a while over a year, but Dom Luciano, he had received from a theology school the title not of Doctor Honoris Causa, but of Doctor Amoris Causa, a doctor not because of honor, but because of the love he had for theology, for the cause of the poor, and so on. And I like it to think myself as a Doctor Amoris Causa, because I didn't receive the diploma, I didn't get any validation, but I have so much love for the subject of my research, for my research interests, that I was able to take that interest and the things I studied, the things I researched, to other places through other works and other possibilities of exchange, dialogue, and presentation. This was really important to me, to find those spaces outside the university where I could find somehow acceptance for my journey as a failed academic, but also find a space to share the knowledge I produced. Because the failure is only for academy, but it's not a failure for me as a researcher, as someone who produces knowledge, because I've done many things, and I kept doing many things with the knowledge I gained from the university.
Murilo's story is quite painful, right? Someone listening right now might be thinking, why are they bringing such a story here? They should be encouraging people, not discouraging them. But I think we need to hear stories like this to understand that this toxic culture of high productivity and normalizing violence also kills vocations, and we all lose because of it. Science, universities, and society lose when they mistreat their researchers or even push people away from their true vocations. And we also need to consider that there is life beyond academy, outside the university. It's perfectly okay to live your calling outside of that space. It's okay if you find meaning and passion in a job that doesn't involve education or research. You're not less than anyone else, nor a failure, for realizing that academia, a master's degree, or a PhD isn't for you. That's all good. And I wanted to take this opportunity, since we're talking about suffering here, to revisit a point I raised in the first episode. Not all suffering is the same, right? The suffering that Murillo describes is deeply tied to the violence he experienced. It's this kind of suffering that I really don't want to condone. I'm not speaking here for everyone who participated in this podcast. This is something much more personal. I know that some theoretical, even pedagogical approaches will reinforce learning through suffering. I make some distinctions here. I see the anguish of going through something difficult, facing a challenge. You know, the growing pain that some teenagers feel? That's what I'm trying to say, an intellectual growing pain, like having to rewrite a chapter of a thesis dissertation because it wasn't good enough. Because, well, we're learning, and it's hard for something to be perfect on the first try. But it's a pain, a suffering that I understand is different from the pain inflicted to harm someone's dignity. I believe hard work isn't easy. It will involve sweat, it will involve tiredness, but it's different from the pain of suffering violence, harassment, or abuse. Is it possible that even in this suffering that wounds human dignity, we will learn something? Well, yes. But I see that as a grace, a blessing for those who suffer, not as a methodology that those who inflict, and us, should try to reproduce. More than just talking about giving up, the final episode of our series is about adjusting and readjusting the course. And this can happen for various reasons. In my case, I felt like I was quitting when I decided not to write a thesis for my master's. I was pregnant with my first daughter, and a professor suggested that instead of writing a thesis, I could do a comprehensive exam, because it would be easier with a newborn child. I felt like I was quitting because I wanted to do research, and a thesis felt really important. But I think that we need to stop and try to listen to ourselves, to understand ourselves. Am I about to quit because I'm stubborn, or is it because this isn't my vocation? Are the subjects and the research too difficult and challenging? Am I just tired? Is the context so tough? Is juggling 1, 2, or 3 jobs exhausting? Or am I too comfortable not taking the responsibility I need to handle this? Or maybe I've gotten so used to doing well in high school without much effort that I've come accustomed to staying in the shallow end. And now that the stakes are higher, it's not as pleasant. Because let's face it, that might be it too. Another issue that might be holding us back is the research topic. Even if the field is our field, sometimes the subject of the research loses its shine. It's no longer as stimulating, or it could be something that's affecting us personally on such a deep level that it is paralyzing us. Listen to Agatha Avelar's experience in Marcela Marcos' voice. Agatha is a doctoral student in linguistics at the Federal University of Juiz de Fora in Brazil.
My dissertation was being developed from a migration diary, and I was working with autoethnography, so I had to talk about that all the time, in the first person, really, very expositional.
Então, realmente era algo muito expositivo, né? Da forma como eu vejo hoje, não tá.
From what I understand today, it wasn't working, because to do the research, I had to relive the entire migration experience, which wasn't a good one for me.
E para além disso, eu precisava.
Besides that, I had to expose that permanently to anyone who would encounter the dissertation, beyond the defense board itself, which would probably also be uncomfortable for me.
E não estava claro para mim que
I thought the big problem was the doctorate itself. It wasn't clear to me that the problem was the topic, which is funny to think about now because clearly it was a topic. It was with the help of my therapist that I realized that it wasn't going to get anywhere if it continued as it was. She was the one who asked if it would be possible to make that change. I was apprehensive about starting something from scratch so late, but the need to change the topic was evident because I immediately felt excited.
Maybe what we need is to give up some practices. Not everyone needs to be the best in the class, you know? I'm not telling you to do things casually, but in a world obsessed with performance, being mediocre might be the best thing we can do for our health. I'm talking about being mediocre in quotation marks, in the sense of doing the best you can while keeping your health in check, without staying up all night, without setting a goal to publish 5 articles a year while attending 3 other events, working 2 jobs, taking 3 courses, and still doing the teaching practice. In this sense, knowing the rules of the game help us feel secure in these decisions. Can the program expel me if I don't attend 3 events a year? What are the conditions for canceling a scholarship or university spot? After all, this high productivity logic, as if it were an assembly line, is not good for science either. Some researchers like Isabel Stengers, whom we'll link in the references, even talk about the need for a slowing down in science. In the Muro Pequeño channel on YouTube, Murilo Araujo shares how one of the pressures he faced was that he entered his graduate program at a time when the course grade had dropped from 5 to 4. And the administration had decided that for the next 3 years, they were going to raise it from 4 to 6, a very big jump. He talks about how this harmed the students. Check out his channel for more. There's a quote by the Brazilian author Paulo Freire in Pedagogy of Hope that I really like. It is necessary to have hope, but hope in the verb esperanzar, to hope actively, because some people have hope in the verb esperar, which is to wait. And hope in the verb esperar is not hope, it's waiting. Esperanzar is to rise up. Esperanzar is to go after. Esperanzar is to build. Esperanzar is not giving up. Esperanzar is to move forward. Esperanzar is to get together with others to do things differently. That's it. We hope that the restlessness and dissatisfaction you feel don't hold you back, but help you move forward and move towards something new, something that is not indifferent to either your own suffering or others, where we can explore the world through science and marvel in peace, looking ahead to a new chapter of life with more love and justice. Because we can give up on many things, but we can't give up on hope. Give up that research, that university, that habit that's not helping you move forward. You can give up on many things, but not on hope. And with that, we wrap up this episode in the season of our project Homos Academicus. We talked about abuse, violence, community, about giving up, adjusting our paths, and our role in this complex and nuanced world. But we also discussed how we can choose our paths, even when we feel cornered. In the end, each of these choices can lead us, at least, to a deeper understanding of who we are and what we truly want. If there's one thing I want to leave with you after this conversation, it's that giving up isn't always a sign of failure, and persisting isn't always a sign of success, no matter the challenges ahead of us. We live a life that doesn't always leave room to explore, rethink, or change our minds. So, if you have the chance to reevaluate and choose what makes sense, and if that involves leaving something behind, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes, changing the course is the bravest step we can take to reach our best destination in the best way. Personally, I hope that we can, in some way, listen to that little voice from within and learn to distinguish when it's simply tired, when it's trying to sabotage us, and when it's calling us to a new path. And if this episode helped you reflect a bit more on that, I hope it continues to resonate in a good and light way in other ears out there. We thank you for following this journey until now, for listening to the end, and for allowing us to talk about such complicated topics that touch on complex structural issues and situations we wish didn't exist. But at the heart of it are also about reunions, about how we can rediscover our purpose with ourselves and with the possibilities we haven't yet imagined or dreamed of.
You've been listening to Homo Academicus, hosted by Alejandro Ortiz, Spanish hosting by Esteban Muñoz, script and Portuguese hosting by Débora Vieira. Script support by Robson Cruz, Ana Bezerra Felício, and Raquel Maia. Resource support by Ana Bezerra Felício, Débora Vieira, Elisa Ferres, José Almeida, and Raquel Maia. Script review by Frederico Lopes. Media outreach by Elisa Ferres and Lorena Brondani. Editing and distribution by Laura Bieber. Graphic and web design by Amanda Lopes. English translation by Tomás Friseiro. Spanish translation by Débora Vieira. Special thanks to Shady Leon, Arely Cortez, Remy Orcon, Monica Cortez, Ruth Hicks, Christopher Hayes, Luana Sofiati, Roland Kubahiro, Tanya Bradanovic, and Leslie Bent. For those who follow us throughout the series, we thank you for spending your time with us. This was our first season of the Homo Academicus podcast, a project founded by the John Templeton Foundation, whose points of view are not necessarily reflected in this podcast. Keep following us on the platforms and visit our website, homoacademicus.org, to learn more about us and follow us in our future endeavors. You can also consider making a financial contribution if you enjoy this experience and would like to encourage us to engage in the production of a second season.